Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the ceremony, the bride has prepared a special video message for everyone to see. I watched from the bridal suite window as 300 wedding guests turned toward the massive screen I'd secretly had installed that morning. My hands trembled as I held the remote, my wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume I no longer wanted to wear. The video began to play, not the romantic montage everyone expected, but security footage of my fiancé tangled in bedsheets with my maid of honor just 2 nights ago. The collective gasp from the crowd below reached me even through the closed window. My name is Emma Catherine Wells, and 8 months ago I thought I had everything figured out. I was 28, a successful marketing director at a tech startup, and engaged to David Harrison, the man I'd loved since our sophomore year at Northwestern. We'd been together for 7 years, building what I thought was an unshakable foundation of trust and shared dreams. David was everything I thought I wanted: charming, ambitious, with a smile that could light up any room and a laugh that made everyone around him feel like they were part of something special. He was the guy who remembered your birthday without Facebook reminders, who could make my uptight grandmother laugh at family dinners, who sent me flowers at work just because it was Tuesday. He proposed on a beach in Maui during what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation, after I'd been promoted to senior marketing director. We'd been talking about marriage for months, looking at rings together, discussing timeline and venue. But when he got down on one knee as the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I was still surprised by the overwhelming rush of emotion. I cried happy tears then, imagining our future children with his dark hair and my stubborn streak, our dream house with the big kitchen I'd always wanted, the life we'd build together brick by careful brick. But love, I've learned, can make you blind to the cracks forming right beneath your feet. My childhood hadn't exactly prepared me for fairy tale endings. My parents had what everyone called a perfect marriage until I was 12 and came home early from school with a fever to find my father in our living room with his secretary from the law firm. Not working on legal briefs. The image of my father, my hero, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped with my math homework, betraying everything our family stood for, shattered something fundamental in me. The divorce was messy and public. Dad's affair had been going on for 2 years, and apparently half the legal community knew about it. Mom had been the last to find out, just like I would be years later. She spent months asking herself what she'd missed, what signs she'd ignored, how she could have been so naive. After watching my mother's pain, I swore I'd never let that happen to me. I'd choose better. I'd see the signs, I'd build a relationship so solid, so transparent, that betrayal would be impossible. How spectacularly wrong I was. The wedding planning had been stressful, but I attributed the tension to normal pre-wedding jitters and the insane logistics of coordinating a 300-person celebration. David seemed distant, but he was working on a major acquisition at his firm, pulling 60-hour weeks and constantly fielding calls from clients. He was always on his phone now, but everyone was always on their phones these days. When he started going to the gym at odd hours, early morning before work, late evening after dinner, I was actually happy about it. He'd been talking about getting in shape for the wedding photos, and I thought it showed dedication to looking his best for our big day. The working late started around the same time. 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, David would text around 6 p.m. saying he was stuck at the office and would grab dinner with colleagues. I'd eat alone in our apartment, usually while addressing wedding invitations or coordinating with vendors, telling myself this was temporary. After the wedding, things would go back to normal. When I suggested couples counseling to work through our communication issues, we'd been snapping at each other over stupid things like whose turn it was to do laundry, or whether we needed assigned seating at the reception. He laughed it off. "We're fine. You're just stressed about the wedding. You're overthinking everything, like always." That phrase, "like always," stung more than it should have. When had my thoughtfulness become overthinking? When had my attention to detail become neurosis in his eye? My maid of honor, Jessica Chen, had been my college roommate and closest friend for nearly a decade. She was the one who stayed up all night with me during my senior year breakdown over organic chemistry. She was my partner in crime during our post-graduation year in Chicago, when we were broke and happy and thought we could conquer the world with matching business degrees and relentless optimism. Jessica was the one who helped me pick out my wedding dress during a weekend trip to New York, the one who threw my bachelorette party at a rented cabin in the mountains, complete with personalized t-shirts and a photo scavenger hunt. She was the one who held my hand through every moment of doubt, every family drama, every vendor crisis. She was also the one who listened to me complain about David's distance, offering wine and sympathy and advice. "Girl, you're just stressed," she'd say, refilling my glass. "David adores you. He's probably just feeling the pressure too. Men handle stress differently than we do." She was also, I would later discover, the reason for that stress, the reason for the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in fitness and new cologne. She was sleeping with my fiancé, and she was comforting me about my suspicions while actively creating them. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. It wasn't just losing David, though. 7 years of shared history, inside jokes and future plans don't disappear overnight. It wasn't just losing the wedding I'd spent 8 months planning down to the last detail. It was losing my faith in my own judgment, my ability to read the people I loved most. It was discovering that the two people I trusted above all others had been lying to my face for months while I planned a celebration of love and commitment. It was realizing that I was my mother's daughter after all, the last to know, the easiest to deceive, the one everyone pitied behind her back. "Aunt Emma, you look like a princess." My 5-year-old niece, Lily, bounced into the bridal suite wearing her flower girl dress, a miniature version of my own gown that had taken 3 fittings to get right. Her dark curls were pinned back with tiny white roses that matched my bouquet, and she carried a small basket decorated with the same ribbon we'd used throughout the wedding decor. Her innocent excitement was the only pure thing left in this twisted day. Behind her came my sister Rachel, Lily's mother, who'd flown in from Seattle with her family just for this moment. Rachel looked elegant in her matron of honor dress, a soft lavender that complemented her blonde hair, but her eyes immediately went to my face with the laser focus of someone who'd known me for 28. Rachel had been through her own devastating divorce 2 years earlier, when she discovered her husband's gambling addiction and the mountain of debt he'd hidden from her. I'd been the one holding her hand through the custody battles, the foreclosure proceedings, and the sleepless nights when she wondered how she'd rebuild her life as a single mother. She'd moved across the country for a fresh start, working 2 jobs to afford a small apartment while finishing her nursing degree online in the evenings. She'd rebuilt her life from scratch, creating a safe, loving home for Lily despite everything falling apart around her. Watching her strength during that time had been both inspiring and heartbreaking. Inspiring because she never gave up, heartbreaking because she'd been forced to become so strong in the first place. "Lily's been practicing her flower petal throwing all morning," Rachel said, but her smile faded as she noticed my expression. The sister radar that had kept us connected through childhood, college, and now this. "Emma? What's wrong? You look like you're about to be sick." I couldn't tell her. Not yet, not with Lily bouncing around the room, so excited to be part of what she thought was the happiest day of her aunt's life. This little girl believed in fairy tales, in happy endings, in the kind of love that her own parents couldn't make work. She'd already been through one family dissolution. How could I shatter that rebuilt innocence with the truth about what I'd discovered? "Just nervous," I whispered, forcing a smile as Lily twirled in her dress, sending the skirt spinning around her tiny legs. "Don't be nervous, Aunt Emma. Uncle David loves you so much." Lily's eyes sparkled with 5-year-old certainty. "He told me yesterday that he's the luckiest man in the world, and he gave me a special job today. He said I have to make sure you know how pretty you look when you walk down the aisle." The words felt like salt in an open wound. Yesterday, while David was telling my niece how lucky he felt to marry me, he'd been planning to spend the evening with Jessica. The casual cruelty of it, using this innocent child as a messenger for his lies, made me physically sick. But I knelt down and hugged Lily tight anyway, breathing in the scent of the baby shampoo Rachel still used on her hair. "I love you too, sweetheart. No matter what happens today, remember that, and remember that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. But that doesn't mean anything is wrong with you." "Why would something be wrong with me?" Lily asked with the confusion of someone too young to understand that adults often hurt each other in ways that splash onto everyone around them. "Nothing is wrong with you," I said firmly. You're perfect exactly as you are. Rachel's eyes had narrowed with concern, that familiar crease appearing between her eyebrows that I remembered from childhood. She knew me well enough to recognize that something was seriously wrong, but she also trusted that I'd tell her when I was ready. After what she'd been through with her ex-husband's lies, she understood that sometimes people needed time to find their words. Lily, sweetheart, why don't you go show Grandma your dress? She's in the hallway talking to the photographer. After Lily skipped out, Rachel closed the door and leaned against it. Okay, spill. What's David done? How do you know it's David? Because I've seen that exact expression on your face exactly once before when you walked in on Dad and his secretary. You look like someone just ripped your world in half. I stared at my reflection in the full-length mirror, at the dress that had cost more than my car payment, at the carefully applied makeup that was supposed to make me glow with bridal happiness. Instead, I looked like I was dressed for my own funeral. He's been cheating, I said quietly, with Jessica, for 4 months. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was deadly calm, the same tone she'd used when confronting her ex-husband about the credit cards he'd maxed out behind her back. How did you find out? Messages on his laptop, photos, texts going back months. They've been laughing about how naive I am. David said he couldn't call off the wedding because the deposits were non-refundable. Rachel's face went through several expressions: shock, fury, then something harder and more determined. What do you want to do? I don't know. I can't marry him. But there are 300 people out there who traveled from all over the country. My boss flew in from California. Your in-laws drove down from Vancouver. How do I tell all these people that the wedding is off because I'm an idiot who couldn't see what was happening in her own relationship? You're not an idiot, Rachel said fiercely. You're trusting. There's a difference. The question is, do you want to slink away quietly, or do you want them to face consequences for what they've done? Before I could answer, Lily's voice came through the door. Mommy, Grandma says it's almost time. Are you coming? Rachel and I looked at each other and I saw my own determination reflected in her eyes. We were both daughters of a man who'd betrayed our mother and gotten away with it, because she'd chosen dignity over truth. We'd both sworn we'd never be that woman. I'm coming, baby, Rachel called back. Then to me, whatever you decide, I'm with you. But Emma, don't let them win by suffering in silence. You've done nothing wrong. She was right. I'd done nothing wrong except trust the people I loved most, and I was about to make sure everyone knew it. The past 8 months had been a marathon of wedding preparations, but also what I thought was the most beautiful chapter of building our future together. I'd thrown myself into creating the perfect day, not just for the Instagram photos or the impressed relatives, but because I genuinely believed David and I were starting the most important journey of our lives. I'd worked overtime constantly to save for the wedding, taking on 3 additional clients, and sacrificing nearly every weekend for 6 months. While David played golf with his groomsmen or went to networking events, I spent Saturdays visiting venues, tasting cakes and coordinating with vendors. I told myself it was worth it, that this was what partnership looked like. Sometimes one person carries more weight, and that's okay. We were building something together, even if the construction felt uneven. The venue alone had taken 2 months to book. I'd visited 17 different locations, comparing everything from acoustics for the ceremony to kitchen facilities for the reception. When I finally found the perfect spot, a historic estate with gardens that looked like something from a romantic movie, David had barely glanced at the photos before approving it. Whatever makes you happy, babe, he'd said, not looking up from his phone. I should have realized then that a man planning to spend his life with me would want more input into where that life began. The small moments should have been warning signs, but I explained them away with the determination of someone who refused to see what was right in front of her. David's phone face down at dinner even when we were alone. The way he'd suddenly become interested in hitting the gym more often, coming home with a post-workout glow that seemed less about endorphins and more about something else entirely. There were the new clothes that appeared in his closet, shirts that were more fitted than his usual style, cologne that I didn't recognize, boxer briefs that replaced his usual cotton boxers. When I complimented him on looking good, he'd smile and say he wanted to look his best for our wedding photos. It made sense, it was romantic, even. The late nights at the office had started gradually, first 1 night a week, then 2, then 3 or 4. Big acquisition, he'd explain when I asked about his schedule. Once this deal closes, things will calm down, but the deal never seemed to close, and things never calmed down. He'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, but when I mentioned it, he had an explanation ready. Jennifer from accounting was wearing this obnoxious stuff in the elevator, he'd say. Or I think it's from the cleaning lady, she must have sprayed something in my office. The explanations were always plausible, always always delivered with just the right amount of annoyance that I was being suspicious over nothing. "You've been working so hard on this wedding," he'd say when I tried to bring up my concerns. "Maybe take a break from all the planning stress. You're imagining problems that aren't there." But the problems were there, growing like mold in the dark spaces of our relationship that I wasn't allowed to examine too closely. I started seeing a therapist during this time, Dr. Martinez, who came recommended by my employee assistance program at work. Initially I went because I was having trouble sleeping, and my anxiety was affecting my work performance, but the sessions quickly became about much more than wedding stress. "You mentioned feeling like you're planning this wedding alone," Dr. Martinez said during our third session. "How does that feel?" "Lonely," I admitted, "but David's busy with work, and I'm good at organizing things. It makes sense that I'd handle more of the details." "Does it? You're both getting married. Presumably you both have opinions about how you want that day to look and feel." I'd never thought about it that way. David's disengagement from the wedding planning had seemed practical, even considerate. He was letting me have the wedding of my dreams without interference. But Dr. Martinez was right. A man excited about marrying me would want some input into the day we promised to love each other forever. "Trust your instincts, Emma," she'd say repeatedly. "You know yourself better than anyone else knows you. You know when something feels wrong." But I didn't trust my instincts. I trusted David's explanations, and Jessica's reassurances, when I confided my worries to her. "Girl, you're just stressed," she'd say over wine at our weekly check-ins, which had become more frequent as the wedding approached. "David adores you. He talks about you constantly when you're not around. He's probably just feeling the pressure too." The irony wasn't lost on me later, my best friend consoling me about my suspicious fiancé, while she was the one sleeping with him. She knew exactly why he was distant, why he was working late, why he seemed distracted. She was the reason for all of it, but at the time, her reassurance felt like a lifeline. If Jessica, who knew David almost as well as I did, who'd been part of our relationship for years, thought I was overreacting, then I must be overreacting. I'd been climbing toward this moment for months, believing I was building something solid, something real. Every late night addressing invitations in my careful handwriting, every compromise on the menu to accommodate his preferences, every dollar saved was an investment in a future that was already crumbling behind my back. The dress fittings had been particularly hard. Standing on that platform in the bridal shop, surrounded by mirrors, seeing myself from every angle in white silk and lace, I should have felt beautiful, excited, radiant. Instead, I felt like I was playing dress-up for a role I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. "You don't look happy," the seamstress had said during my final fitting, 2 weeks before the wedding. "Brides usually glow more than this." "Just nervous," I'd said, the same lie I'd been telling everyone, including myself. But nerves weren't what kept me awake at night, staring at David's back as he slept peacefully beside me. It wasn't nerves that made me feel like a stranger in my own relationship. It was intuition, fighting to be heard over the noise of wedding planning and social expectations, and my desperate desire to believe that love was enough to fix whatever was broken between us. 3 weeks before the wedding, I'd found a receipt in David's jacket pocket when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. "Dinner for 2 at Chez Laurent, the most romantic restaurant in the city," the same restaurant where he'd taken me for our first anniversary. The receipt was dated for a Thursday night when he'd told me he was working late. When I asked him about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. "Client dinner. Big potential account. You took a client to Chez Laurent. Why not? It's impressive. I'm trying to win their business." The explanation made sense, but something about his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this conversation. But I let it go because what was the alternative? Accusing my fiancé of lying about a business dinner 3 weeks before our wedding. I let it go just like I'd let go of everything else that didn't fit the story I needed to believe about us. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my wedding dress hanging on the closet door. The same room where I'd cried myself to sleep at 12 years old,
listening to my parents fight downstairs, the same room where I'd sworn I'd never let a man make me feel small and betrayed. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Can't wait to marry you today, beautiful. See you at the altar." The casual cruelty of it, sending loving messages while betraying me behind my back, made me physically sick. I'd discovered the truth 3 days earlier in the most cliché way possible. David had left his laptop open while he showered, and a message notification from Jessica popped up on his screen. Not just any message, but a photo that made everything crystal clear. I'd sat there on our bed, laptop in my hands, scrolling through months of messages. Their secret wasn't new, it had been going on for 4 months. 4 months of working late, and girls' nights, and lies stacked on top of lies. The worst part was reading how they talked about me. "She's so naive," Jessica had written. "She has no idea." David's response: "I know I should call it off, but the deposits are non-refundable, and you know how she gets about money." They were planning to continue the affair after the wedding. I was just the convenient cover story, the stable choice, the woman who'd planned the perfect wedding for a man who saw me as a financial burden to avoid. Standing in my childhood bedroom, I felt like that 12-year-old girl again, devastated, betrayed and powerless. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't my mother who'd suffered in silence for years before finding the courage to leave. I had choices, and I was going to make one that honored my truth. The wedding venue looked like something from a magazine. I'd spent months perfecting every detail: white roses, and eucalyptus garlands, candles flickering in glass holders, fairy lights strung through the oak trees. 300 guests sat in white chairs facing an altar, decorated with the flowers I'd carefully chosen. I was supposed to be walking down that aisle in 10 minutes. Instead, I stood at the back of the venue with the wedding videographer Marcus, who'd become an unexpected ally when I explained what I needed. "Are you sure about this?" he'd asked when I hired him to install the projection screen that morning. "There's no going back once that video plays." "I'm sure," I'd said, though my hands were shaking. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. The crowd was getting restless. David stood at the altar in his black tuxedo, checking his watch and whispering to his best man. Jessica sat in the front row wearing the navy blue dress we'd picked out together, smiling, and chatting with my relatives, like she hadn't spent the last 4 months destroying my life. I gave Marcus the signal. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the ceremony, the bride has prepared a special video message for everyone to see." The screen flickered to life, and I watched from the back as the first frame appeared. Security footage from David's apartment building, timestamped 2 nights ago. The same night Jessica was supposedly at her sister's baby shower. The crowd fell silent as they watched David and Jessica enter his apartment together, his hands already roaming her body before the elevator doors even closed. The footage switched to the hallway camera, showing them stumbling toward his door, completely wrapped up in each other. But the real moment of truth came with the audio recording from inside his apartment, conversations I'd captured on the baby monitor I'd secretly placed there, after discovering the first suspicious text. Their voices filled the outdoor venue through the sound system. "I can't believe we're doing this 2 days before your wedding," Jessica's voice echoed across the stunned crowd. "Don't think about that right now," David replied. "Emma doesn't have to know anything. This doesn't change what we have. But after the wedding, what then? Then we keep doing exactly what we've been doing. She'll be so busy playing house she'll never notice." The collective gasp that rose from 300 guests was audible even from where I stood. I watched David's face go from confusion to horror to pure panic as he realized what was happening. Jessica had gone completely pale, her hands pressed over her mouth. But the real twist came when my 5-year-old niece Lily, in her flower girl dress, stood up in the front row and said in her clear, innocent voice, "Mommy, why is Uncle David kissing the wrong lady?" The silence that followed Lily's question was deafening. 300 people sat frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. David took a step toward the back of the venue, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. I walked down the aisle then, not the romantic walk I'd dreamed of, but a march of reckoning. Every eye in the venue was on me, some filled with pity, others with shock, many with a newfound respect I'd never seen before. "Emma, I can explain," David started when I reached the altar, but I held up my hand to stop him. "No," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone Marcus had quickly set up. "You've done enough explaining. 4 months of explaining, actually." I turned to face our guests, our families, our friends, our colleagues. These people had traveled from all over the country, bought gifts, taken time off work, all to celebrate what they thought was a love story. They deserved to know why that story was ending before it began. "I'm sorry you all had to see that," I said, my voice stronger. "I discovered David's affair with Jessica 3 days ago. I could have called off the wedding quietly, sent you all a simple cancellation notice. But I've learned something important about myself these past few days." I looked directly at David, who was standing there in his expensive tuxedo looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I've learned that I'm not my mother. I'm not going to suffer in silence while everyone around me pretends not to see what's happening. I'm not going to smile and play the happy wife while my husband and my best friend laugh about how naive I am behind my back." The crowd was completely still, even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. "I've also learned that I'm worth more than non-refundable deposit. I'm worth more than someone who sees me as convenient. I'm worth more than a man who tells my 5-year-old niece that he's the luckiest man in the world while actively planning to cheat on me for the rest of our marriage." I pulled off the engagement ring. David had given me the ring I'd stared at for hours imagining our future together, and set it on the altar. "This wedding is over, but the reception will continue. You've all traveled so far and the food is already paid for. Please, stay and celebrate not a marriage but the fact that I found out who these people really were before I legally tied myself to someone who doesn't know the meaning of love or loyalty." The aftermath was swift and brutal. David's face had gone from pale to red to a sickly green as the full weight of public humiliation hit him. He tried to approach me, but my father, who had been silent through his own divorce years earlier, stepped between us. "I think you've done enough damage," Dad said quietly. "You need to leave now." Jessica had already fled. I caught a glimpse of her navy dress disappearing toward the parking lot, her high heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She didn't even try to apologize or explain. She just ran, leaving David to face the consequences alone. David's parents, who had always been cold to me, looked mortified. His mother approached the altar with tears in her eyes. "Emma, we had no idea. We are so sorry."
My future mother-in-law, former future mother-in-law, was a proud woman who valued reputation above almost everything. The public nature of this revelation was probably more devastating to her than the actual betrayal. But in that moment, she seemed genuinely remorseful. "I raised him better than this," she whispered. "I'm ashamed." About half the guests left within the first hour. David's college friends, some mutual acquaintances who didn't know how to process what they'd witnessed, relatives who felt uncomfortable staying for what was no longer a celebration. They trickled out in small groups, whispering among themselves. But about 150 people stayed. My family, my real friends, some of David's relatives who were as disgusted by his behavior as everyone else. They moved from the ceremony space to the reception area, and what should have been my wedding dinner became something else entirely, a celebration of truth, of courage, of the kind of loyalty I wished I'd received from the people I trusted most. My coworker Lisa approached me as I changed out of my wedding dress into a simple black dress I'd brought as backup. "Emma, I have to tell you, half the office suspected something was going on between David and Jessica. We didn't know how to bring it up without proof." This revelation hit me almost as hard as the original betrayal. People had known. People had seen signs I'd missed or ignored, and no one had found a way to warn me. The conspiracy of silence that protects cheaters had worked perfectly until I'd decided to break it myself. But other reactions surprised me. David's cousin Mark, whom I'd barely spoken to during our 7-year relationship, found me during the reception. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said. "My first wife cheated on me too, but I didn't find out until after we were married. I wasted 5 more years trying to make it work with someone who didn't respect me. You saved yourself years of pain." The evening that should have been my wedding night became something entirely different. Instead of a honeymoon suite, I found myself in my childhood bedroom again, surrounded by the women who truly loved me. My sister Rachel, my mother, my college friends who'd driven hours to be there. "I'm proud of you," Mom said, brushing my hair like she used to when I was little. "It took me years to find the courage to leave your father. You found it before you made the same mistake I did." The video went viral within 48 hours. Someone had recorded the projection screen on their phone and posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Bride exposes cheating fiancé at her own wedding." Within a week, it had 15 million views and was being discussed on morning talk shows and wedding blogs across the internet. The attention was overwhelming and mostly positive, but also deeply uncomfortable. I hadn't done this for internet fame. I'd done it for my own dignity and truth. Now strangers were commenting on every aspect of my appearance, my decision-making, and my relationship history. But among the noise there were messages that mattered. Women from around the world shared their own stories of betrayal, and how they'd found the courage to leave. Therapists and relationship experts praised the decision to prioritize self-respect over social convenience. Wedding planners started including betrayal clauses in their contracts after seeing how quickly a celebration could become something else entirely. More importantly, the people who mattered in my real life rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. My boss gave me a month off to process everything, with full pay. "Take care of yourself," she said. "Your job will be here when you're ready." My landlord, who had been pressuring me to move in with David and break my lease early, quietly extended my rental agreement for another year at the same rate. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to offer support, spare bedrooms and shoulders to cry on. Even acquaintances from college and high school sent messages saying they'd been through similar betrayals and wanted me to know I wasn't alone. The most unexpected support came from David's aunt Margaret, his father's sister, who had always been kind to me but whom I barely knew. She called 3 weeks after the wedding to invite me to lunch. "I've been married 43 years, she said over coffee and sandwiches. "I've seen a lot of couples come and go. A lot of marriages succeed and fail. What you did took more courage than staying would have." David's mother is embarrassed, but she's also relieved. She knew he wasn't ready for marriage, but she didn't know how to stop it without seeming unsupportive. Margaret told me that David had called off work for 2 weeks, and was apparently reassessing his life choices. Jessica, according to social media, had moved back home with her parents in another state. "Good," I said, and meant it. They deserve each other. But the rebuilding wasn't just about external support. I went back to therapy with Dr. Martinez and started processing not just the betrayal, but the patterns that had led me to ignore the red flags for so long. "You have excellent instincts," she said during one session. "You knew something was wrong months before you found proof. The work now is learning to trust those instincts instead of talking yourself out of them." I started taking kickboxing classes on Tuesday evenings, and joined a book club that met Thursday night. Small steps toward building a life that was entirely mine, not shaped around someone else's needs and schedules. 3 months after the wedding, I got a promotion at work. 6 months later, I moved to a new apartment with better light, and a small balcony where I could grow herbs and vegetables. Each decision felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away during those 7 years with David. A year later I ran into David at the grocery store. He looked different, older, maybe. Or just, he was alone, buying the kind of frozen dinners and energy drinks that single men default to when no one is taking care of them. For just a moment, I felt a flash of the old sympathy that had kept me making excuses for him for so long. "Emma," he said when he saw me. "Hi." "Hi, Dave." We stood there awkwardly by the produce section. Two people who once planned to spend their whole lives together, now struggling to fill 30 seconds of accidental conversation. "I heard about your promotion," he said finally. "Congratulations." "Thank you. I also heard you moved to that apartment complex near the river, the one with the balconies." It struck me as odd that he was keeping track of my life, but I didn't ask how he knew. "I did. It's nice, quiet." He nodded and looked like he was going to say something else, then changed his mind. "Well, I should let you get back to your shopping." As he started to walk away, he turned back. "Emma? For what it's worth, I'm sorry, really sorry. You deserved better." I looked at him. This man I'd loved for 7 years, planned a future with, nearly legally bound myself to, and realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity, just a kind of distant recognition, like running into a teacher from elementary school. "Yes," I said simply, "I did deserve better." That evening I called Rachel to tell her about the encounter. Lily, now 6 and in 1st grade, grabbed the phone to talk to me. "Aunt Emma, guess what? I lost my first tooth." "That's so exciting. Did the tooth fairy visit?" "Yes. She left me $2 whole. Mommy said it's because I've been brave about everything changing." Lily's words weren't meant to be profound, but they hit me with the force of simple truth. Everything had changed. My life looked nothing like what I'd planned a year ago, but it was wholly mine now. I was brave about everything changing. "You know what, Lily, your mommy is right. Being brave about change is one of the most important things you can learn." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over the river. In the distance, I could hear children playing in the park, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere in the building behind me, someone was cooking something that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. These were the moments I'd forgotten to notice during all those years of planning for a future that never arrived. The small, quiet moments that make up a real life, not the Instagram perfect moments, but the ordinary magic of being present in your own story. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the wedding videographer who'd helped me set up that projection screen. Saw your interview in the magazine, proud of you, hope you're doing well. I smiled and typed back, doing more than well, living. The truth was, I'd never been happy, not the manic happiness of a bride-to-be, not the conditional happiness of someone whose joy depends on another person's choices, but the steady, unshakable happiness of someone who knows her own worth and refuses to settle for less. A year ago, I thought I was about to begin the best chapter of my life. I had no idea I was right. I just didn't understand what that chapter would actually look like. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is the complete destruction of everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads you straight to the life you were actually meant to live. I finished my tea as the last light faded from the sky, then went inside to my quiet apartment, my growing plants, my chosen solitude, and my hard-won peace. Tomorrow I would wake up in a life I'd built entirely for myself, accountable to no one's expectations but my own. It was better than any fairy tale ending I could have imagined.